Some of the most respected special operations units in the world are about to land in B tier, and some are going even lower. And before you tell me I have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about, did spend years inside Tier 1 special operations and intelligence communities working along some of the best special operations units and intelligence organizations across the entire world on the exact kind of missions that these organizations that we're about to talk about are built to execute. And here's what people get wrong. The guy pulling the trigger is only part of what makes a special operations unit dangerous in the first place. So today we're ranking the entire machine behind the operator. All right, welcome back. This is part 2 of the ranking of the world's special operations / special forces units. And if part 1 pissed people off, I have a feeling that this one's about to make it worse. Because today we've got the CIA ground branch, Israel's Shayetet 13, Canada's JTF2, Poland's GROM, New Zealand SAS, Norway's FSK, and several others are going on the board today. But let's understand the criteria. I'm not asking, are these guys badass? They are. I'm asking a much harder question. If the mission absolutely had to succeed, how much capability does the entire organization bring to the fight today? Selection, training, combat experience, intelligence, ISR, aviation, logistics, technology, funding, authorities, strategic reach. Because at this level, everybody has exceptional operators. What separates them is what happens behind the operator. And with that said, let's see where these units land today and which one of them actually made it all the way in to S tier. All right, so do a little bit of a recap. I'm evaluating every organization across the same 15 criteria. First is selection standards. How difficult is it to even get into that organization? Training, how extensive and advanced and realistic is their training? Skill level, what is the overall tactical and technical proficiency of that particular organization? Mission complexity, how broad and difficult are the missions that they're even expected to perform? Operational experience, have they actually performed those missions in combat, and do they have real-world operators with real-world experience? Effectiveness, how consistently have they accomplished the missions that they were created to perform? Funding and resources, what kind of money, infrastructure, aviation, logistics, and support are available to them? And then equipment and technology, and what level of weapons, communication, surveillance, and other technology can they access? And these last two, funding and equipment and technology, in my experience, and a lot of people, really surprises people, including myself, when I got to experience Tier 1 units with large disparities in level of funding, has a larger effect than most people think on the overall effectiveness and capabilities of units. The next is innovations. Are they simply adopting what other organizations develop, or are they actually helping to create new tactics, techniques, equipment, and capabilities themselves? Are they learning from the lessons that they learn in combat? Next is authorities. What are they actually authorized to do, and where can they operate? Because no matter how badass your operators and unit are, if they don't have the authorities to go do anything, doesn't really make much of a difference. Intelligence integration. What kind of intelligence architecture surrounds and supports the organization? If you don't have the level of intelligence to drive your operations, you're not going to have operations. Strategic impact. Can their operations influence national level objectives, or are they primarily just creating tactical effects? Organizational culture, which is leadership, professionalism, accountability, discipline, standards, and the overall health of that particular organization. And then institutional maturity. How many years and generations have they spent developing and perfecting their mission and the culture within that unit? And then finally, institutional stability, recruiting, retention, leadership stability, government support, investigations, scandals, and other pressures that can increase or degrade the capability of a unit. Now, I'm not going to individually score every organization in all 15 categories during the video because we'd be here for 3 hours. Instead, I'm just going to focus on the categories that separate one organization from another and just kind of do an overall reasoning of why I put them in that particular group. And remember, we're ranking organizations, not individual operators. I'm not saying an operator from an A tier organization automatically beats an operator from a B tier organization. It's not my dad can beat up your dad. That's ridiculous. We're evaluating the entire ecosystem surrounding that operator because an operator can't do it all himself. Training, experience, money, technology, intelligence, aviation, logistics, authorities, all of those things determine what that operator can actually accomplish. Unless, of course, you're Christian Craighead, aka Obi-Wan Nairobi. Apparently the guy can do everything himself. But for the rest of us human beings and for everybody else, the ecosystem actually matters. And that's one of the biggest things people miss when they compare special operations units. And there's one more thing I want to emphasize. This is a ranking of some of the best special operations organizations on the planet. So if an organization ends up in C or C plus tier, that doesn't mean they're bad. Far from it. Just making this list is an accomplishment. We're comparing these organizations against Delta Force, DevGru, the SAS, Green Berets, Rangers, Australian SAS, and some of the most capable special operations organizations in existence. Somebody has to be towards the bottom when you're ranking essentially the best of the best. And the difference between S tier and C tier might have very little to do with how good the individual operator is. And that's usually the case because it usually comes down to funding, technology, aviation, intelligence, combat experience, authorities, government support, or simply the size and resources of the country behind them. So throughout this video, remember, lower on the list does not mean bad. It means lower relative to an absolutely ridiculous level of competition. It's a feat just to make the list. And before we get into the first unit for part 2, there's one more concept we need to establish before we start ranking, because it's going to affect several organizations in part 2. And it's actually one of the reasons I'm adjusting the ranking from part 1. The 5 Eyes. Strength isn't built in comfort. It's built through repetition, through discipline, through showing up when it would be easier not to. For me, training has always been about pushing limits, becoming stronger, faster, and more capable every single day. But the gear you wear matters. Barbell Apparel was built for athletes who move, who train, who refuse to compromise between performance and style. Clothes that move with you, built for strength, built for durability, and built for the grind. Whether it's the gym, the track, or the everyday mission, train hard, move freely, live disciplined. Barbell Apparel. Use code Stoic Viking 25 and step into the gear that's built for you, how you actually train. 5 Eyes is one of the deepest intelligence sharing partnerships in the world, and it consists of 5 countries: the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. So why is it called 5 Eyes? The name actually comes from intelligence dissemination markings, identifying information intended for the eyes of personnel from those 5 countries. But there's also a reason these 5 countries developed an unusually close intelligence relationship. The 5 predominantly English-speaking countries with deep historical, cultural, military, and political ties. The relationship grew out of the American-British intelligence cooperation during World War II and was formalized after the war, eventually expanding to include Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And for generations, these countries have been among America's closest and most trusted intelligence partners. 5 Eyes isn't simply 5 friendly English-speaking countries occasionally exchanging intelligence. We're talking about generations of intelligence cooperation, shared conflicts, common security interests, signals intelligence, technology, and an extraordinary degree of institutional trust. And that matters enormously for special operations because remember, intelligence integration is one of the 15 criteria. A relatively small country like Canada or New Zealand could never independently build an intelligence ecosystem comparable to the United States. But membership in 5 Eyes gives those countries access to intelligence relationships and capabilities that most countries their size simply just don't have. And that can become a massive force multiplier for the special operations forces in that unit. But there's an important distinction. Access to allies' capabilities isn't the same as owning the capabilities yourself. Canada doesn't suddenly have America's intelligence infrastructure because they're a 5 Eyes partner, and 5 Eyes membership doesn't automatically make your special operations forces better. Countries like Israel have developed extremely sophisticated intelligence capabilities outside of the 5 Eyes. But when 2 organizations are otherwise relatively close, being part of that ecosystem can provide an advantage under this particular ranking criteria. And that's going to matter several times today, and it's one of the factors behind the adjustment we're going to make from part 1. So the adjustment we're going to make today is France's GIGN. I'm moving them from B down to C+, and this isn't because GIGN isn't elite. If we're ranking hostage rescue and counterterrorism, GIGN would obviously be at the top, but we're ranking overall special operations capability, and the GIGN has considerably narrower mission set than most of the soft units on this list. And there's also an ecosystem factor that we've just discussed, is France doesn't have access to the 5 Eyes, and some of the units that are going on here are very close, but there was definitely the distinction that they had access to the Five Eyes and GIGN did not, which definitely made a little bit of a difference. So in order to include a lot of the units we're talking about today, France is going down to a C+. And now let's get into our new organizations. And we're starting with probably the most singly requested unit after part 1. And that is Canada's Joint Task Force 2, or the JTF2, was established in 1993 and has evolved into Canada's premier national level counterterrorism and special operations organization. They do counterterrorism, hostage rescue, direct action, special reconnaissance, sensitive national missions, and by virtually every publicly available indication, these guys are extremely good. Their reputation among allied special operations forces is outstanding. They've operated alongside American and coalition SOF and accumulated significant operational experience during the global war on terror. And they also benefit enormously from Canada's membership in the Five Eyes. So why only a B? Because being tier 1 within your own country doesn't automatically make you an A tier compared with the rest of the world. And there are 3 comparisons that really help explain JTF2's position. First is the Australian SASR. The SASR has substantially greater historical combat experience: Vietnam, East Timor, Afghanistan, Iraq, and decades of institutional knowledge accumulated before JTF2 even existed. JTF2 absolutely has legitimate GWAT operational experience, but based on what we can establish publicly, they don't have SASR's depth of multi-generational combat experience. Second, we now comparing them to what every tier 1 unit is compared to: the British SAS, the OG, the original grandfather of tier 1. Here, the difference becomes ecosystem. Britain has a larger defense establishment, greater expeditionary infrastructure, a larger special operations enterprise, and a larger rational intelligence architecture. Canada gets access to an incredible amount through the Five Eyes and its relationship with the United States. But again, access isn't ownership. And there's a third comparison that demonstrates something really important about this ranking: the Australian 2nd Commando Regiment. JTF2 is Canada's Tier 1 national mission organization. The 2nd Commando isn't generally placed in the same national Tier 1 category, yet I actually have the Australian Commando slightly ahead within B tier. And you're probably going to ask me why. And first of all, I actually want to explain something real quick about the Australian Commandos, why they are a special case within this particular thing. Anytime a nation needs a tier 1 unit, they typically will create a new organization and not take a tier 2 unit and then create it push into sort of the capabilities and funding of a tier 1 organization. The Australian Commandos are an exception to that rule. While they were originally started as sort of a tier 2 style organization, their authorities and capabilities have been used and pushed towards a tier 1 organization and have come up closer to be alongside the Australian SASR in capabilities and authorities and do a lot of the same missions that your typical tier 1 unit would do anyways. So with that being said, it helps to describe that an organization's position, mission, and priority within its own national system, that the 2nd Commando has accumulated substantial expeditionary combat experience, and particularly during Afghanistan. Australia also has a larger defense establishment, a strong soft ecosystem, and extremely close American integration in the same Five Eyes advantage that Canada enjoys. But the JTF2 gets the advantage in national level counterterrorism authorities and sensitive strategic missions, but 2nd Commando gets advantages in sustained expeditionary combat experience and institutional depth. They're incredibly close, but under this ranking, I currently have the Australian Commandos slightly ahead, but they're both going to be in B tier. And again, B tier on this list is still an extraordinarily capable special operations organization. All right, next, we're going all the way to South Korea. The 707th Special Mission Group, or S707 SMG, is South Korea's premier counterterrorism and special mission organization. And their security environment is unique. They're sitting across from North Korea. So they do counterterrorism, hostage rescue, direct action, protection of strategic facilities, and high-threat national contingencies. These aren't theoretical requirements. The 707th trains extensively and benefits from South Korea's sophisticated military and technological infrastructure. South Korea also maintains a close military relationship with the United States. And the biggest limitation for me is its operational experience. There's simply not the same level of sustained combat experience that we would see with many of the organizations on this list. And training, regardless of how good it is, can never completely reproduce combat. and the abilities and all the things that go into improving an organization's overall capabilities. And so that's where the 7 of 7th, I'm going to give them a rating of a C+. And remember, C+ on this board doesn't mean mediocre. We're comparing them against the best special operations organizations on the earth. Now we're heading north to a country that is very close to my heart, Norway's FSK. Most people are one decision away from changing everything. I spent years at the tip of the spear as a Tier 1 operator. And the one thing that separated the men who made it from the ones who didn't had nothing to do with talent. It was fitness, and not just physical fitness. The discipline, the clarity, the mental edge that comes from being locked in physically. And that transfers to every single area of your life. For a limited time, I'm offering a 30-minute one-on-one fitness consultation and audit. We will get on a call and I'll break down exactly what you need to be doing going forward. And not a cookie cutter program, but a custom strategy built for you that you can implement immediately. 30 minutes, $49.99. And you will walk away with a plan from someone who has operated and lived this at the highest levels. If you are serious about leveling up, click the link. The FSK might be one of the most underrated organizations in this entire ranking. They do counterterrorism, hostage rescue, direct action, special reconnaissance, military assistance, and are experts in extreme cold weather and Arctic operations. But what's really changed my perspective on FSK was looking more closely at their operational experience. Norwegian Special Operations Forces were involved in Afghanistan across essentially the entire conflict. They participated in early operations associated with Task Force K-Bar and Operation Anaconda. And later, Norwegian SOF spent years helping develop and advise Afghanistan's Crew 222 counterterrorism force. That's legitimate operational experience. And then let's add something that very few organizations on this list can replicate or specialize in as well as they do: Arctic warfare. Cold weather, mountains, snow, long distance movement, and survival. And learning how to operate effectively in these conditions isn't something you master during a 2-week exercise. Norway has generations of institutional knowledge doing it. And there's one of the reasons why they have the highest medal count in the Winter Olympics. FSK also has a deeper institutional roots than JTF2. So why aren't they above JTF2? Again, ecosystem. Canada has a larger defense establishment, a larger soft enterprise, and most importantly, Canada is inside the Five Eyes. Norway is an extraordinarily close NATO ally, but Norway isn't a Five Eyes member. So I give FSK the advantage over JTF2 in some areas, particularly institutional maturity and arguably operational experience, but JTF2 gets the advantage in intelligence integration, resources, and the broader ecosystem surrounding that organization. They're very close. So I'm putting FSK in B tier, but just slightly behind JTF2. Now we're going all the way to South America, down to Colombia. And Colombia presents almost the opposite problem. And the organization we're going to be focusing on is the AFEUR. And I apologize if I butcher this Spanish, but the Agrupación de Fuerzas Especial Antiterroristas Urbanas, which is roughly translated to English as the Urban Counterterrorism Special Forces Group. You also see the organization associated with the AFEUR Alpha, and what Colombia lacks in resources, it makes up for in real-world operational experience. For decades, Colombia forces have fought the FARC, the ELN, the drug cartels, kidnapping network, insurgents, and terrorist organizations. This wasn't simulated combat, it was real life. AFEUR developed significant capabilities dealing with the hostage situations, high-value targets, urban counterterrorism, and direct action. Colombian forces also benefited from decades of American security assistance and training. But then we get to resources, funding, technology, aviation, ISR, research and development, global intelligence architecture, expeditionary infrastructure. Colombia simply can't compete with the wealthier nations above it on this list. And this is another perfect example of why we're ranking organizations instead of individual operators. The Colombians may have more real-world combat experience than organizations ranked above them, but the ecosystem surrounding these operators is significantly smaller. So Colombia's AFEUR gets a C+. Now we're headed to the Middle East to have the highest ranked new military organization in all of Part 2, and that's the Shayetet 13. If Sayeret Matkal is Israel's strategic reconnaissance and national mission organization, Shayetet 13 represents Israel's premier maritime special operations capability. You can loosely compare them to the British SBS or DevGru with maritime perspective, although each organization has different missions and authorities. But the Shayetet 13 conducts maritime counterterrorism, direct action, special reconnaissance, underwater operations, ship interdiction, sabotage, and sensitive national missions. So what pushes them higher on this list for me is a combination of operational experience, intelligence integration, technology, and Israel's special operations organizations exist inside an incredibly demanding security environment. Real-world operations aren't occasional events. They're a part of the institutional experience. Then combine that with Israel's capability in drones, signals intelligence, electronic warfare, surveillance, cyber, precision weapons, and intelligence fusion. Israel consistently punches far above its size. And that's the same reason I put Sayeret Matkal in A tier in part 1. So the Shayetet 13 is going to get a ranking of an A tier, right alongside the Sayeret Matkal. Now we're going to head north, back to Europe, where we can talk about one of the most popular special operations organizations in the world, and that's going to be Poland's GROM. So GROM was established in 1990 as Poland emerged from the Cold War. From its beginning, it was heavily influenced by Western special operations organizations and developed close relationships with American and British SOF. GROM specializes in counterterrorism, hostage rescue, direct action, special reconnaissance, maritime operations, and expeditionary military operations. They've accumulated meaningful operational experience both in Iraq and Afghanistan. And the Polish GROM is actually extremely difficult to separate from FSK and JTF2. They're roughly the same age as JTF2. They've developed strong relationship with American SOF. They've accumulated a legitimate GWAT experience, and their reputation is excellent. But I don't see enough evidence to put them above JTF2 or FSK. JTF2 gets an advantage through Five Eyes in the Canadian ecosystem. FSK has a deeper institutional history, significant Afghanistan experience, and its unique Arctic specialization. GROM remains extremely capable with it, but within B tier, I'm putting them slightly behind those two organizations. So the Polish GROM gets a rating of a B tier. And now we're going to head all the way to the Far East, all the way to Japan. And Japan represents another interesting problem. Japan is one of the most technologically advanced countries in the entire world. Its Special Forces group is highly selective and trains closely with American forces. The 1st Battalion, 1st Special Forces group of the Green Berets is actually located in Japan. And technology isn't the problem. Equipment isn't the problem. Training isn't the problem. The problem is the real-world operational experience and historical authorities. For decades, Japan's post-war security framework significantly constrained how its military could even be employed overseas. Those policies have evolved as Japan responds to an increasingly difficult regional security environment, but when we're ranking institutional combat experience, those decades matter. So Japan is going to get a very similar rating to South Korea, which is going to be a C+, because they have a similar situation where they're both technologically advanced. They have a great relationship with American SOF, but they really just lack legitimate combat experience. Now we're going to head farther south, all the way to New Zealand, and we're going to talk about the New Zealand SAS. New Zealand is a relatively tiny country that has managed to maintain an internationally respected special operations capability for generations. The New Zealand Special Air Service, or the NZSAS, traces its heritage, like all Tier 1 units or any other unit that has SA in it, to the SAS model, and accumulated operational experiences in places like Malaya, Vietnam, and Afghanistan. Their specialties include special reconnaissance, direct action, counterterrorism, military assistance, and long-duration independent operations. They're also deeply integrated with Australia, Britain, Canada, and the United States in the Five Eyes. And remember, the Five Eyes matters, but the limitation here is really scale. New Zealand simply doesn't possess the financial intelligence, aviation, logistic, or technological infrastructure of the larger countries on this list. The individual operators can be phenomenal, but we're ranking the organization, and the ecosystem surrounding that organization remains relatively small. But we're going to give the NZ SAS the respectable rating of B tier. Now we're going to head all the way to Africa, and specifically to South Africa. I spent years as a Tier 1 operator with ISA, and I had the privilege to work with some of the best conditioned human beings on the planet. I know what peak performance looks like, and I also know what it looks like when someone's running on empty and they're telling themselves that it's just stress. If you're watching this and your energy is down, your recovery is shot, and you feel like you're operating at half capacity, your testosterone is probably the reason. I know it was for me, because it's not your mindset, it's not your discipline, it's your biology. Human performance is veteran-owned and operated by other Tier 1 excellent operators. They run blood work, they will build a protocol around you, and they actually know what they're doing because they've lived the same life as you. And I use them because I don't promote things I don't use. Because you're watching right now, you can get a discount of 20% off by using my discount code Viking. The link is below. Get the blood work done. If you're fine, then you'll know. If not, then you'll have a solution. Either way, you win. Discount code Viking. Do it today. Now we get to one of the most historically fascinating organizations in this ranking, the South African Recce's. During the border war era, South African Special Forces developed an extraordinary reputation: long-range reconnaissance, deep penetration, sabotage, direct action, independent operations across enormous distances. Their fieldcraft became legendary. If we were ranking these organizations at their historical peak, the Recce's would be dramatically higher on this list, but we're not. We're ranking them today. And South Africa's broader military has struggled with funding, readiness, maintenance, modernization, and equipment availability. Eventually, those problems affect even elite organizations. Aircraft needs maintenance, ammunition, night vision, training, technology, readiness. It all costs money. You can have an incredible institution knowledge and experience, but without resources, maintaining cutting edge capability becomes extraordinarily difficult. So despite their legendary history, I'm going to have to give the South African Recce's rating all the way into C tier. Now we're going to go ahead back to South America, and we're going all the way to Brazil. Now, the organization we're looking at is the Brazilian Army, and I apologize now if I butcher this, the Comando Operações Especiais, which is abbreviated to kind of the COpEsp, but in English, it translates to Special Operations Command. And that's an important distinction here because this organization isn't really a single assault unit like JTF2 or GROM. It's a Brazilian Army's broader Special Operations Command, which encompasses multiple specialized capabilities. And Brazilian SOF operates in an environment that presents challenges that most Western special operations organizations rarely experience, especially the Amazon, and that's jungle warfare. And between that and their long-range operations, special reconnaissance, direct action, counterterrorism, the extreme heat, humidity, rivers, the dense vegetation, the animal life, and incredibly remote terrain. In jungle warfare specifically, Brazilian forces possess pretty high institutional knowledge that shouldn't be underestimated. But once again, we're ranking the entire ecosystem. Compared with the organizations higher on this list, Brazil has less recent expeditionary combat experience, a smaller global intelligence ecosystem, and fewer resources available for the highest end special operations capabilities. And that doesn't take anything away from the individual Brazilian operator. It's the ecosystem surrounding them. And that separates these organizations at this level. So the Brazilian Special Operations Command is going to get a rating all the way down at C tier. Now we're going to head all the way back up to the United States. And now we've reached the final organization. And we're going to break the rules a little bit because this isn't technically a military special operations unit. We're talking about CIA's ground branch, publicly associated with the Special Activities Center, or the SAC. And yes, I know the CIA isn't military, but if we're seriously ranking organizations capable of conducting some of the world's most sensitive special operations, I don't think you can leave ground branch off of this board. And they're going to go very high. Ground Branch is publicly associated with the CIA's paramilitary capabilities. Their publicly discussed mission set includes covert action, paramilitary operations, intelligence collection, working with foreign partner forces, operations in denied environments, and support to sensitive American national security objectives. But what makes Ground Branch so interesting is where they sit, not just simply in special operations, but they're sitting inside an intelligence agency. And that changes the equation specifically when it comes to authorities. CIA paramilitary officers have historically included veterans, America's most capable special operations organizations. Most CIA ground branch guys I've ever met come from either tier 1 or tier 2 organizations. So you're potentially taking someone who already has years of special operations experience and combat experience, and you're putting that person inside the CIA. Now you're combining operational experience, intelligence, covert action, foreign networks, language, cultural expertise, national level resources, and most importantly, different legal authorities. And that's an incredibly powerful combination because there is one category the CIA ground branch ranks higher than any other unit in this entire ranking system, and that's in authorities. And this is probably their biggest advantage. One of our criteria is authorities. Military special operations and CIA covert action don't operate under identical legal frameworks. And there's a thing known as Title 10 versus Title 50 authorities. When properly authorized by US government, the CIA can conduct covert action. And covert doesn't simply mean secret. It means a role of the United States government is intended not to be publicly knowledge. That creates options for national leadership that conventional military organizations don't necessarily provide in the same way. There is, for anybody who knows, there are military organizations that do occasionally operate both under Title 10 and Title 50, or a military operation can go under the authorities of the CIA, or then they will operate under Title 50. But predominantly, the organization itself, as the CIA versus a Tier 1 special operations unit, the CIA is generally going to have more authorities in a particular situation. Not always the case. I have been involved in certain operations where we had some authorities where they didn't, and we used our relationship together to get around certain limitations of an operations. But they generally have more authorities than we do, or the Tier 1 special operations. And there's a reason why the alleged kill list that comes out every Tuesday from the White House is carried out by organizations like the CIA's ground branch, and not typically Delta Force or SEAL Team 6. And obviously they have the enormous advantages of being inside the CIA, access to human intelligence, foreign intelligence networks, analysis, technical capabilities, relationships with foreign intelligence services, and access to the broader American intelligence community. That gives them some of the most sophisticated intelligence ecosystems available to any organization on this list. And they also have substantial operational history and experience. The CIA paramilitary personnel were among some of the first Americans operating with Afghanistan forces following September 11th. They've worked alongside indigenous forces and American special operations during some of the earliest operations against the Taliban, Al-Qaeda. They did this in Vietnam and almost every other conflict that the United States has ever been in. And the broader history of the CIA paramilitary operations extends far beyond Afghanistan. And obviously a huge amount of what this organization does isn't publicly available. So I'm evaluating what we can establish from open sources and a bit of my own experience, but even the public record demonstrates significant operational experience. So why S tier? Now let's combine selection, experience, authorities, intelligence integration, technology, funding, strategic impact, mission complexity, and access to the broader American national security ecosystem. Ground Branch definitely belongs near the top, but why not S+? Because Ground Branch is still a relatively small, highly specialized organization. And while they can potentially leverage an enormous amount of capability from across the US intelligence community and the military, they don't have the same scale or amount of dedicated direct support surrounding them that an organization like Delta and SEAL Team 6 can bring to a mission. The same level of dedicated aviation assets, ISR, intelligence, logistics, communications, medical support, specialized enablers, and an entire military special operations infrastructure designed to put operators onto a target and sustain them once they're there. Ground Branch can potentially access many of those capabilities, but remember what we said earlier, access isn't the same as ownership, and that's an important distinction in this ranking. Ground Branch's advantage that it can combine extremely experienced operators to, between the levels of Tier 1 and Tier 2 shooters with CIA intelligence capabilities, covert action authorities, and foreign networks and strategic reach. That gives them capabilities that even special operations organizations don't necessarily possess. But in terms of size, dedicated support, and other sheer combat power of the ecosystem immediately surrounding that operator, I would still give Delta the advantage. And that's why the CIA Ground Branch is going to get an S tier rating and not an S+. And so that's part 2. 11 new organizations, 1 adjustment from part 1. And I'm sure I've managed to piss off Canadians, Poles, Frenchmen, South Africans, Brazilians, which I already do on a daily basis anyways, and many others throughout the world. Awesome, because I do love to rage bait people. But don't just tell me you're wrong. Tell me why I'm wrong. Use the criteria. If you think JTF2 belongs higher, well, then tell me why. If you think GROM belongs in B+, tell me who in B+ they compare with and where they would beat them. If you think the Reckies should be significantly higher because of their history, tell me how heavily historical capability should be weighed against current funding and readiness. Because ultimately, this entire ranking system comes down to one question. What can this organization actually accomplish today? Not 20 years ago, not at the height of the global war on terror, not based purely on reputation, today. And now I need you guys to decide where we go next. And are there any special operation units I haven't covered yet that you want me to in part 3? Or should part 3 take this ranking into a completely different direction? Should we rank the special operations forces of America's potential adversaries, the Russian Spetsnaz, Chinese special operations forces, North Korea special operations forces, and others? So let me know in the comments, more allied and partner units or adversary special operations forces? You guys decide where part 3 goes. I'm Joe England, aka the Stoic Viking. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.